Ikal is a top environmentalist. My comrade sister from Kenya. I had the privilege of driving with her in northern Kenya for 8 hours in one day. I never forget that experience. When we went to the oil fields in the Turkana communities. Ikal in 2012 won the Goldman Environmental Prize, which is the equivalent of the Environmental Nobel Prize, and she did that mostly. One of the highlights that got her the prize was the campaign against the Gilgel Gibe 3 Dam, which was going to seriously impact the water supply in northern Kenya. She speaks alongside, I know she would like to say on behalf of, she speaks alongside Kenyan indigenous communities to stop the plans to build that dam. She's the founder and coordinator of the organization called Friends of Lake Turkana, which campaigns for environmental justice in the region around Lake Turkana. Beyond that, because she's one of the top campaigners against the coal power plant and destructive works around Lamu area, and of course, all across Kenya, and she's very active in All Watch Africa. I want to invite Ikal to take the floor. Welcome, Ikal.
Thanks, comrade. Good morning, good afternoon. Greetings all comrades, colleagues, family, friends, sisters. If you're asked what is a just transition, what it is to you, because that's a very critical thing, just to understand what is a just transition to everybody, because it's a vision, it's a process, it's a dialogue that needs, it always brings in different actors, whether it is bringing in, the community members, state authorities and all others. It's very important to realize that it's an ongoing process, and what a just transition looked like when the discussion on just transition began, and now it's changed over time, and it's important to allow it to keep changing. I've had all my colleagues speaking about, the shift from fossil fuels, but I'm going to be a devil's advocate here, because there's a very big danger, and why I'm glad that Nemo is really starting to bring out this whole conversation of what does just transition mean and the justice in it, is because there is, unless we start to think about what this just transition is, many people know that we don't want fossil fuels, but what is it that we want? And when we think about what it is we want, we have to be thinking about what Fatima yesterday mentioned. Who's controlling this transition? Who's governing this transition? Who has access to this energy transition that we're asking for? Because right now, whether we say the state, whether we talk about who, in the end, it is the few at the top, the people with the money, it's the multinational companies who are controlling the discourse. Some of our countries don't even have an idea what is the energy mix they want, what is the energy provision they want. But when a discussion is had in the World Bank, when a discussion is had when African presidents are asked to jump in and jump on their planes and go to DC and meet the president of America, that's where the decisions are made. When the US president, when it was Barack Obama, is going around the African continent with a group of business executives talking about what business should look like and opportunities for business in Africa, then those are the rooms, those are the discussions that define what is the development that comes into our country. And so in thinking around the just transition, we have to be really asking ourselves, who is really defining this just transition? It goes back to questions and statements made yesterday, and Nemo reiterated it this morning around, because the transition is linked to development. And so whose development is this, by whom and for whom? And sadly, in the last few, with my sisters in women, there's been a discussion around, everyone's talking about the just transition initially was focused on the working peoples. And so it was, who's losing the jobs, and the discussion has gotten lost in a binary, which is about jobs and employment versus the environment. I guess that's where we get lost in the debate, how many jobs and all this. But if you really look at it, when you look at the Africans working in all these multinational companies, the topmost African is paid, let's say, that, he's sort of very low in the cadre. And so again, it's the working people. So even within our continent, if we talk about a just transition within the continent, even within our own continent, those who work, whether they're working in the fossil fuels or others, they're working people. And they end up being mixed. They're thrown into the equation, but they do not understand what is the discussion. And since a few weeks ago, we've been discussing around what really needs to happen for this just transition to happen. If you really think about it, for us to talk about a just transition, we also have to talk about redefinition and restructuring of what the structure of economic development looks like, the political aspects. And I was glad yesterday Mem talked about the social welfare and the social well-being, because all these definitions are decided by somebody else, and they're brought to us. Oh, what does poor person look like? What does, defining poverty? They'll tell you, oh, Africans and Kenyans are living beyond, below a dollar. Based on who? And if you really look at it, if I'm living in my household, if I'm living in my own homestead, everybody in my household is my economy. So we provide for ourselves. So how do you then define unemployment in that basis? Because all these are numbers which are defined by somebody else. And so we have to really think about redefining the entire economic numbers, how the metrics that are used to then really allow ourselves to have that just transition. Because everyone says, oh, employment, we're going to employ people. What are you employing? Who are you employing? To do what? What is the sort of work that they're doing in terms of their dignity? Because at the end of the day, a call worker who then goes home and is getting sick, what is the dignity? And some of them are doing it not because they want to, it's because this is the definition that's been put in front of them. So it's going to be very critical to think about this just transition. And my comrade from Southeast Asia has highlighted it, because in the current conversation, the African continent is renewables, and everybody's sort of really afraid of and tiptoeing around it. And we have to allow ourselves, comrades, to create that safe space where we can unpack even this renewable energies, that hydro dams across the continent, in Turkana here with the Gibe Dam, in Pandankua in the south of the continent, the Grand Inga, which our current Prime Minister has been saying it's a great project and is pushing it under the AU. These are big projects that are not necessarily to help uplift the lives of the poor. They lead to loss of land, they lead to destruction of ecosystems. And in the end, that hydroelectric power is not for the uplifting of lives. If you look at the Grand Inga, it is actually to deliver power from one place to the mine, so that the power, we can mine more. And so we have to really be very critical that we don't shout one thing and the next time we're running again and saying, oh, we didn't realize it. So who are we shifting? What's this just transition? Who are we shifting the power to? And what are the structural reform approaches that we must take into account? When we talk about the justice aspect, we have to be thinking about distributive and procedural justice, where you're looking at the inclusion of people, the equitable decision-making, the process of who owns this, how do we own this? And hearing yesterday speaking about, market women owning a solar plant and wind farm and ways that they can generate power. Those are going to be the critical things that we bring, because when we are moving from one to the other, as Philip was indicating earlier, that the fossil companies are very smart, that all they need to do is flip themselves and they become the new guys. So they've understood the new words of carbon offsetting and all these things, and they're taking, and they have the resources to come up with new technical terms. And so the next thing we will be discussing, it will be Shell will be owning the largest wind farm in Africa. What will have changed? It's still the same extractive process. And so we have to really, one, try as much as possible and bring the lived experiences. And so even for the working populations, we have to think about how do we bring the labor rights movements? How do we bring the working poor? How do we bring the women? Because in actual sense, the way that this whole process is defined, it is in ways that fragment our production systems. And in fragmenting our production systems, they change our social reproduction, which then leads to what we call feminization of poverty, where again, the women are always at the back of it. And so thinking around it, how are we going to basically, really create, it's a deliberate effort to break down the current system of production, the current system of economic systems, and really the narratives around it. Because even if we look at it, and it's something that we don't like to talk about, if the mining of cobalt, nickel, lithium, copper, aluminum for the renewable energies is done in the way that it is going on now, then we're just shifting from one person to the other, because the Chinese right now are the ones who are, taking over the lithium in mining sites. They're taking over the cobalt mining sites. They're taking over the aluminium mining sites. And they're saying, we are doing renewable energies. The end product is, we're going to show you a value chain that in the end produces the things that you want. In fact, we could even do the industry in Africa. Is it owned by Africa? No, it's still owned by them, probably because of a debt issue that our African governments have taken from the Chinese. So I think we have to really ask ourselves harder questions, but really try and really unpack it, because in the end, the fossil companies are bringing us CSR. The wind farm in Lake Turkana Wind Power has taken land from poor pastoralist populations, paying them a penny, is denying them access to grazing, and in the end saying, it's the largest wind farm, it's green energy, we're contributing to Kenya's NDCs. And so we have to really be very clear and understand and try and link this conversation so that the just transition is not about climate activists, rural communities, indigenous populations, but also bring in aspects around trade policies, because it's the neoliberal policies around, because whether we like it or not, the neoliberal policies that are there now will just shift and implant themselves within the renewables conversations. And so it's the multinational companies which will come in. If I'll give you an example, the Lake Turkana wind farm is currently funded by, he was a backpacker, noticed there was energy, and then called in a few people, packaged it, got guarantee from the Kenyan government, is funded by the Dutch government, the German funding is in it, the DFID funding is in it, the AFDB funding is in. So it's a pack of different funders coming in, and no one wants to leave. Luckily, Google realized, and Google was coming in, and so you're seeing new people coming, new financing. What does Google have to do with energy production? What is the new interest in energy production? So again, it's the new the packaging of the MNCs like the Googles coming in and implanting themselves in conversations and taking over the conversations. And so it's going to be very critical for us to see that, one, the narratives are very localized, they're owned by the people, they're governed by the people, and in no way is it hijacked. It's the same way the food security and food sovereignty discussion. Bill Gates sits in the food security CSOs in discussion right now. He has he has the privilege, he will get in there and control the conversation. So it's going to be very critical for us to allow those hard conversations and think through how we are going to disrupt the current systems, both political, social, economic systems that will allow and also bring in, because whether we like it or not, the working peoples who end up, whether working in the multinational owned green renewable energy or the multinational owned fossil fuel, are our own brothers and sisters who are just trying to produce and feed. So they're the working people, people who are struggling to put food on the table. And how do we then move it? As my colleague from Southeast Asia was saying, providing land. So how do we make sure that the process allows them to own some energy production, but at the same time be able to provide food? As Ken Henshaw yesterday was talking about the centralization, the current energy production system in the continent is very centralized. And so the democratization of energy has to come on the table, so that even as we think about this just transition, we think about it about equity, justice, and how we democratize this whole system, but make it as simple as, so that women, especially women in local communities, indigenous communities, in rural populations, are able to not be forced to get into a train that doesn't take them to the right destination of development, but in one way or another allows them to define and be part of the discussions around what a just transition means to them, and how that happens with them on the table.